Hey guys, the past few days we've been stuck developing the soap method I posted about the other day, so due to a lack of new content, today I'm going to take a look at Maiden, and I'll use one of my recent VODs to explain what's going on in multiple layers of difficulty. This video will probably help players towards their Grandmaster time, but if you're still struggling after watching this, the cause probably has more to do with trolling than with the method, and I advise you to just keep practicing. Alright, let's get started. I main South Mage, so I can only give you this perspective, but I can still talk about and point out what my teammates are doing, or meant to do. For the beginner section, I want to talk about the most basic, most important things to focus on. These are the things that must happen every single Maiden in order to successfully perform the method. Maiden has 200 defense, and therefore you want to hit 2 hammers and 100 BGS, 1 hammer and 140 BGS, or 200 BGS with no hammer hits. The way to accomplish this is to have the meleeers hammer spec once, and then the mages will BGS until 0 defense. The ranger can back up BGS if necessary. So after dumping specs, the mages go back to range, and then catch north 1, 2, 3, 4, and south 1, 2. If north is late, they can call out to the south mage to get 3s. Meanwhile, the ranger and meleeers are hitting the boss to push for the next set of crabs and perform the so-called stacking of crabs. Stacking is a very key element to getting quick maidens because of enormous splash damage on the clump, and even the stragglers are getting hit by an additional barrage, reducing the time to kill them and getting back on the boss. After 50's proc and the stack happens, everybody rushes to kill the old crabs that are soon to unfreeze. I know it's technically called thawing, but whatever. The point is, 70s are gonna walk soon, so they need to die ASAP. Both meleeers can help reduce the clump by Din's bulwark specking the N2 crab. This will hit N1, N2, and the clump. The clump won't be completely gone, so someone has to chin the rest. You can pick to have either the ranger or south mage to chin the clump. Whoever of the two is not chinning goes for the S1 clump and kills whatever is left of it. After the clump is pretty much gone, we transition into the skip. The same thing applies for 30s as for 70s. North freezes 1, 2, 3, 4, South freezes 1 and 2, and North can call for the South to get something if they're late. Meanwhile, the Ranger and meleeers are hitting the boss, essentially doing the same thing as for 50s, but instead of pushing for 50s, we're pushing for the kill. The main difference is that the mages, once they're done freezing, equip their melee gear as it's more DPS. You can use leftover spec to speed it up. Now let's get into the intermediate section. So after dumping specs, the mages go back to range, and this is basically because if they scythe proc, you can't possibly catch a freeze on the first crab. If you shoot a bow from range, however, it lands as your attack comes off cooldown and you can instantly freeze the crabs that you helped to spawn. If you scythe proc, you have to get off the boss in order to catch all your crabs, and wait for the spawn to happen, which is bad. This is why mages stand in the back. My threshold to bow is about 7%. You can expect the team to hit about 6% per cycle, and this is what you should play for. Going back to before 70s, you'll notice I bow on 72%. I was able to make this decision because I bowed on about 80% and I decided it won't proc from that HP, so I can bow again. For this to be reliable, it is important that the whole team stays on tick and not lose any ticks. The ranger and meleeers are basically just hitting the boss and flinching their T-bow or ZCB to not get drained, while flinching to swap tank between each other to proc as many venges as they can. When 50 spawn, they all have an important job to help clean up the stack. As I mentioned before, the ranger cleans up S1, while the meleeers bulwark spec N2. What you're seeing here is actually the second bulwark spec. The first one happens right as 50's proc. If you look closely, you can see meleeer 1, who bulwark specs first, go for the bulwark directly after the proc. Meleeer 2 goes for a scythe swing on N1 before doing his bulwark spec. This way, we split the bulwark damage into 2 sections. The first hits 70s, while the second hits 50s. It is important that the ranger and meleeers stay on the boss to make sure 50's proc. After that, the bulwark spec needs to be done from the south of N2 for the best coverage of the bulwark AoE. If you decide against the bulwark method, the meleeers can simply each pick one of the two N1 or N2 stacks and full kill them before getting back on Maiden. The ranger or south mage then needs to chin the entire clump. During the whole Maiden until after 30s, the north mage's responsibility is only to bow and freeze their crabs. So we haven't really talked about when the ranger is specking. I have left it up in the air because there is a few things you can do, but for the most important ones to make sense, we need to talk about proc times. Let me take a step back and talk about 70s again. The same cycle 70s proc, she's already at 64%, and that helps guarantee a smooth stack. There is some RNG involved in these procs though, and sometimes it's a shallow 69.9 proc. During good 50s procs, you'll notice that the North Mage freezes 1, 2, 3, 4 from the 70s, and then gets to freeze 1, 2, 3, 4 from the 50s right after. This type of proc ensures that all crabs are frozen, while giving everybody else the most time to kill off old crabs. Ice Barrage has a 5-tick cooldown, and so does the Scythe. This means you want the 50s proc to take 4 Scythe hits, counted from when the 70s spawn. I know this was a bit of a long explanation, but essentially the Ranger can ZCB spec on their last hit before the 50s proc, guaranteeing that 50s come exactly when we want them to. Of course, this is only possible when they don't need to back up BGS. If they do need to back up BGS, they can claw that same hit or alternatively save claws for the skip. Next up, I want to talk about some final min-maxing. I can't really string these subjects together, so I'm just going to go one by one. Before entering Maiden, the Ranger and Meleeers need to spellbook swap to Arceus so they can thrall an entry. Always try to make sure your mages are venged. For specs, the Meleeers need to hammer on the first possible tick after pre-firing their bow. The mages can then stall a tick and BGS one tick after hammers land. This is the most efficient way of entry specking. The mages should always bow from max range because closer distance means faster projectile speed. This could cause a proc to happen off cycle, which trolls the north mage. On south, I like to wait a tick with freezing S1 because I have to wait a tick with freezing S2. Because you're behind the cycle by one tick, the south mage can then bow from closer range to proc on cycle. An important note with freezing and chinning is that you always want to click the middle or front of the stack, because of how splash damage works. Chinning or barraging S2 doesn't reach N3, and vice versa. To stay on cycle, you want to either chin 3 or 5 times after freezing S2, and then bow into the 30s. The south mage is your best choice for the chinner, because the ranger can scythe while the mage is chinning. Otherwise, the mage would be bowing while the ranger is chinning, and this is just worse. Additionally, the ranger can cast Death Charge before killing S1, which lets them regen extra spec that they can use during the skip. Both meleeers can do the same before their bulwark specs. Since the mages are still full HP, they can off-prey Venge during the skip, and because many low HP crabs leak into Maiden, her max hit is boosted and you can deal some serious skip damage with the mage Venges. I know I haven't talked much about the Ranger, Meleeers, and North Mage. Like I said earlier, the North Mage has a pretty simple role. Reduce her defense, bow, and then catch crabs. It's an important role because you have to be very precise though. The Ranger has the easiest role. They simply swing Maiden, ZCB into 50s, and kill the stacked S1. The Meleeers have to be a little more coordinated, because they have to pick who bulwarks first and who bulwarks second. You'd almost think there's not much to it, but they have to do all that while staying on tick, keeping up thralls, death charge, venges, swapping tank to proc the venges, and while not getting drained or getting caught by blood. To properly tank swap and ZCB flick, you need to know how Maiden's aggro mechanics work. Maiden's attack speed is 10 ticks, which is 2 scythe attacks. Her attack animation is a few ticks long, but during that animation, she has already selected her target. She picks her target based on distance, and if the distance of 2 players is equal, she prioritizes whoever is higher up in the orb order. This is why the mages take slots 1 and 2, so they can pull aggro during the skip without any issues. The Ranger gets slot 3 because they sit in the south, and there's something weird going on in the south. For some reason, Maiden considers south and west one tile further than north and east. This means the Ranger can take aggro on the east side, proc their venges whenever they want, and then give aggro away by going south. The meleeers will then have to flinch for each other. Okay, well, I think that's pretty much it for today's video. It's extremely packed with information, and I almost want to apologize to anyone who wasn't looking to get their brains fried. I was close to deleting the video actually. However, since none of this high skill content currently exists on YouTube, I figured I should just post it. I do apologize for my clunky editing and scuff script. It is what it is, go next. Thanks for watching.